I mean, ultimately, it started with a love of the written word because we adapt fiction, horror fiction into audio. It started with a Scholastic book fair when I was 6. I got my first copy of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which were rewritten from folklore by Alvin Schwartz, and they were the quirky, short little things you could tell in less than 3 minutes, often with a jump scare where you leap out at the people around the fire. And I was just as interested as that as I was in the notes at the back of the book that explained where they came from. So, as I got older, I looked into that more, but I was the kid carrying around the tape recorder at weddings, interviewing my drunk uncles and asking them for their ghost stories. And I would transcribe them later. So you can imagine, a kid at like 8, 9 years old typing up the words of his inebriated relatives, and keeping those papers for 20 years.
This episode of the Ampéritif podcast is produced and distributed by Be Connected, a social media management firm in Northeast Wisconsin.
Hello and welcome to the Ampéritif podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lauer, and this is a podcast about turning your passion for music and entertainment into a career. Today we're going to hear from Craig Groshek about turning his passion for his drunk uncle's ghost stories into a podcasting empire. Craig is the founder of Chilling Tales Entertainment, and they're the makers of podcasts like Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and Horror Hill. These are radio theater style horror themed podcasts. And so, of course, the cocktail that we whipped up for Craig had to be horror inspired. It's a Moscow Mule style cocktail with ginger beer. Do you know the difference between ginger beer and ginger ale? Well, tune in to find out. As Craig puts it, it's an 80s slasher flick in a cup. Then we're going to talk to Craig about what it's like working with voiceover artists like Daniel Radcliffe of Harry Potter fame, or Robert Englund of Freddy Krueger fame, Tay Day, and others. We're also going to talk to Craig about where the sound effects come from and what are some of the inspiration for his stories, like finding a dead body. Can you imagine? We're feeling pretty special about this episode because Craig has never done an interview before. As he puts it, the stories are the stars of his show. Thanks for listening, and hey, I'd love it if you would follow, like, subscribe. We're on all the social platforms, and so come find us and let us know what you think of the cocktail. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, listeners, viewers, fans, friends, and family of the Ampéritif podcast. We are here on episode 11, that's 011, and I guess as I think a little bit, reflect on, the music and entertainment element of the podcast, podcasting itself is a form of entertainment, and so why not bring on a guest who is a fellow podcaster? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome, cue the intro music,
and enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, Craig Groshek.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So Craig is the founder of Chilling Entertainment, and Chilling Entertainment is the creator of Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, among other podcasts, but
yep, among others.
Yeah,
It's been a fun journey.
Yeah, so we'll wind down the intro music here, but you probably recognize that from one of your podcasts.
It's been a while. I was there when he recorded the guitar for that, actually.
Were you? Yeah. Fun little kind of ominous, a little bit of foreshadowing in that intro music there. But so Chilling Tales obviously is a horror themed entertainment company that primarily focuses on podcasts, and so of course we always take some inspiration for our cocktail from our guest, and so today's cocktail is sort of I'm going to hold it up to the camera here, a Halloween-inspired slash horror inspired cocktail. I'm going to see if I can tip it just slightly. You can kind of see the eyeballs in there. But Craig, let's give it a try.
You really outdone yourself with this one here.
A lot of, very artistic expression.
I got to be careful that these window clings don't just make this go flying out of my hand, though. We're going off the label uses.
Right. Yeah.
For this.
The bloody window clings that I've got on the glass there. They might slide off. It's a little humid today, so we've got some sweating on the glass. But so yeah, this is a Moscow Mule inspired cocktail. Obviously, also inspired by horror, the theme of Craig's work, and Halloween is coming up, and so very timely Halloween / horror inspired cocktail for our guest on episode 11, Craig Groshek.
Thank you. I appreciate that. For some of us, Halloween never ends. So this is the time of year when we get to pretend like what we do is normal.
I love that. So first impressions, Craig?
I like it. You can't go wrong with a mule. I mean, I told you it was one of my favorite things. I don't know, the combination of the ginger and lime just hits right. And I've had versions of this with many different flavors, and I've yet to find one I don't like.
Yeah.
Your last ingredient I'm not familiar with, actually, but I like it. It's got I don't know, to me, it has kind of like a summer sort of a feel to it, but
Sure.
you know, we've added sort of a spooky season flair in it. I don't know. These are perfect year round, I think. And as we get into this, it looks like we will free the gummy eyeballs or whatever it is that's in those ice cubes.
That's right. Yeah, there's some, so I, again, went a little overboard. We've got, and you can see it there as Craig takes a sip, but we've got bloody window clings on the outside of the glass. Garnish on top of the glass are some gummy ears and gummy eyeballs. And then the ice in the glass actually features some gummy eyeballs as well. So as the ice melts, the eyeballs start to float to the top there. And so you get a lot of gummy with this one, I guess. I happen to be a fan of gummy, so that works really well for me. But let's get into the ingredients. So that's always kind of the first thing we talk about a little bit is what's in the cocktail. This one's a pretty simple one, and I like that because it's easy to prepare. You don't have to go through a lot of prep. You can go out, get the ingredients, and just pour a round of these for everybody. So obviously, Moscow Mule inspired. It starts with ginger beer. So did you know that there's a difference between ginger ale and ginger beer?
I know there's a difference. I'm not sure what it is.
What it is, yeah. So that's always one of the things I kind of geek out a little bit about with the ingredients is a little bit of sort of cocktail 101 or, research projects for these. But ginger beer is made with fermented ginger, whereas ginger ale is just made with ginger. It's not fermented or anything, but because of the fermenting, you get a little bit of alcohol content in the ginger beer, but not enough to make it alcoholic per se, in that they would consider it to be non-alcoholic. Like a non-alcoholic beer has about 0.5% alcohol in it, and that's about the same as a ginger beer.
It's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Of course, you can just buy a 6-pack of this stuff, and I always just thought of it as soda.
Yeah, and it basically is, but because of the fermentation process with the ginger for ginger beer, it does have a little bit of alcohol content, but not enough to be considered an alcoholic beverage. So you wouldn't have to like be 21 to buy it or anything like that. You'd never be able to drink enough to have any effect. But so there you go, a little bit of insight for you. So that's the first ingredient, ginger beer, and then we so pour that into the glass about 3/4 full, and then some lime juice, so about half an ounce of lime juice. After that, we put in the vodka and Aperol. So vodka, in this case, we used a cherry UV vodka to get some of the red color, along with the Aperol. The Aperol also has red in it. And so that's where you get the kind of red color. It's supposed to sort of mimic blood. And when you do the ginger beer first and pour the other ingredients on top, it sort of, kind of dribbles down a little bit. And we've got some pictures of that, and looks kind of like blood. Kind of.
Edgar Allan Poe would be thrilled.
I love it. So anyway, that's a quick rundown of the ingredients. And yeah, it definitely has a Moscow Mule kind of feel. The ginger beer really kind of brings that home.
like I said earlier, the UV takes me right back to college. There's something about maturing where it's supposedly not as cool anymore to have colored vodka, even if this is for the occasion with the
Right. Yeah.
Halloween
Yeah.
theme.
There's something juvenile, isn't there, about very bright flavored or bright colored cocktails.
Sure, but there could be something juvenile about making money from ghost stories too, for a living, no less.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the kid in all of us, I think, appreciates that, especially this time of year. I'm curious. Do you see a spike in traffic during the Halloween sort of season?
Oh, every year. It
Yeah.
starts a little differently every year. It's usually in September.
Okay.
Of course, by September, my kids and I have been to Spirit Halloween 5 times already, and I already have rotting pumpkins on my doorstep. We're a little further than most.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, you get a spike every year, so we do our best to prepare for that, and we've done some pretty fun stuff in the past, including like 31 days of news stories, one every day. We don't go quite so hard anymore with it, being that we have 6 weekly shows that come out now.
Yeah. Sure.
But we get a pretty full schedule. We start planning for this already in February.
For Halloween specifically.
Yeah, specifically stories. I remember when I first started, my brother, actually, of all people, asked me if I was ever going to run out of stories, and I laughed him out of the room. Even then, I knew it wasn't going to happen, but we have a really nice assemblage of authors that write custom content for us. Some really great creative types. And so February, we're already getting them to start thinking about jack-o'-lanterns and porch lights and pumpkin smashing and hay rides and things. So it never really stops. I mean, the process continues from then all the way up until June, July, when we start getting the vocals in. You said I produce podcasts, but a little different than the show that you've got here. It's not two
Right.
guests in a room. We're spread out all over the country, so we're casting radio theater style productions.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a process with a lot of people involved.
Sure.
And then it all comes together, which is really neat because we can make everybody sound like they're in the same field or the same room, and that's special. It didn't used to be like that back in the 30s and 40s. You'd actually have everybody all in the same room.
would,
You had to
yeah.
pay to bus them in or whatever.
Yeah. But yeah, you used the phrase radio theater just now, and I would have described it that way to someone else, not having heard you use that phrase before. But that to me is kind of the type of experience that you have when you listen to one of your podcasts. So
Yeah, it's very immersive. I used to keep testimonials on my website, like, up to date. I fawn over them when I first would get those.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
some of my favorite ones to this day were ones where we'd have blind people listening or people with terminal
yeah.
illnesses, and they would be
Super
talking
cool.
about how they were transported someplace completely different, and they would forget whatever it was they had going on, including indescribable pain. So it definitely has the power to move people. It's like a movie in your mind, and there's something special about being able to create a scene without the simplicity of pointing a camera at it. If there's a fight scene in a movie, you just film the people punching each other, doing stunts. We have to create that with sound. And we do actually duplicate a lot of the types of methods Hollywood uses when we're trying to come up with things. Now, of course,
Sure,
we have access to sound effects libraries, so we don't have to go hit, a stake with a hammer to simulate a punch anymore.
Sure.
Thankfully. There are guys on my team that would like to do it that way.
So I'm gonna jump the gun here a little bit, and there are two things. One, we've got to come back and name the cocktail. But since you were just talking about some of the sound effects, right next to you is an ice bucket, and I'm not sure if you can see that on one of these angles here. There you can see it, yeah, on the wide angle. And in that ice bucket are some what I call icebreaker questions. It's all part of the theme, right? This is a cocktail type of podcast, right? We include cocktails. And one of the questions, I'm just going to ask it because we've been talking about this now, and that is, do you have a Foley artist, or are there Foley artists as part of your production, or kind of, how do you? And you just said that there's a lot of sound effects they're sort of canned that you can use, but yeah, talk to me about that a little bit. I'm curious.
We've experimented with everything over the years. It's obviously less expensive, more cost effective to simply use existing libraries. These days, you can purchase or license just about anything you need. There are situations where we simply don't have the right sound, and we do have people literally produce those.
Sure.
If you needed monster effects, for example, we had a story called The Skin Collector, written by my son, actually, and it needed a very particular monster sound, so the voice actor utilized sounds from lions and tigers and merged them with his own voice, and then pitched everything differently to make it more guttural and low. And he combined that with the sound of howling wind and things until he got it the way he wanted. So it all depends on what the project calls for.
Sure.
Some are not quite as detailed and don't need that level of production, but there's some where we do like to go all out. We reproduced War of the Worlds years ago just for fun, and all the sound effects were pretty much custom in that one. We wanted to do it like they did it back in Hollywood.
Sure.
When they had the New York studios and things on the East Coast.
So when you were doing that, is there somebody on your team that kind of specializes in sound effects, or was that you, or?
There's a few people we have. Most of the audio design is actually done by sound designers professionally that do that for a living now. I used to do a lot of that myself for about the first 10 years, and it is a very time-consuming business. And as you can imagine, trying to run something like this just from what you do with your own show, there's a lot of hats. You're operating as camera operator here until you don't have to anymore. That's a momentous occasion.
Right? I know. Camera operator, sound engineer, lighting engineer. You kind of have to wear a number of hats, marketing.
So as fun as it was to sound design, lay out all the tracks and have 97,000 tracks going myself, it wasn't my favorite part of the job. That might sound odd, being the guy that runs it, but my favorite part is actually working with the people and developing the ideas. Watching them jump from the page was actually the most fun.
Sure.
The process of meticulously going over every sound effect to make sure a gunshot sounded proper, it was not my most favorite part of the process.
Sure.
I would tend to labor over that a lot more than the average person would. And like a lot of entertainers may comment on, there's always a struggle between art and business when you're doing this as a business. I wanted to try to have some sort of a nice mix between those two things where we're offering something commercial, but it also respects the genre, and we don't just jump on bandwagons and things. And there's pros and cons to all those approaches. And the sound effects approach has something to do with that also. You can spend hours making something sound perfect, but
right.
Does the average listener really get anything out of that? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly. So it's part of the art, which is why, which is important, but you also have a business, and kind of there's some value and some efficiency there. So before we go any further here, I couple of things. One, we do have to come up with a name for the cocktail. So I had one pop into my head, but I also don't want to sort of lead the witness here in case you had any ideas.
Well,
so
we could do
before
rock,
I forget,
paper, scissors over it, but Bloodbath immediately jumped out at me.
Bloodbath, okay.
I mean, that's low-hanging fruit, though.
It is, yeah. Well, so was mine. Bloody Mule. So that, and my guess is somebody's already come up with one. There's probably already a Bloody Mule out there, but yeah, I think the whole thing is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek sort of cocktail when you think about the garnish and the window clings and the blood effects. So being corny, it's almost calls for a corny name in my view.
This is a very 80s drink. This is 80s, 90s slasher flick in a cup here.
Sure, right. I love it.
And the eyes don't look a whole lot better than the special effects they used in some of
right. Yeah, I gotta get a close up of the eyes here in the
if anybody remembers the first Friday the 13th when the characters would meet their demise, they weren't popping their real eyes, folks. They looked a lot like these sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Some kind of rubber.
It's funny you said tongue in cheek. We're just missing a couple of gummies for making that literal here. We almost got a whole body.
Funny story really quickly. I bought a tray of gummies that sort of presented like a fruit tray or a veggie tray that you would take to a party. So it's got these different compartments, and there were fingers, eyeballs, ears, and brains. And the first pass at the stick here had fingers and eyeballs. And then I set it on the glass, and I thought, what it really needs is some ears next to those eyeballs. And so I took everything off the stick and and put the ears on instead. Another quick funny for you. It only has, I think, left ears. There were no right ears in the in the basket.
Still doing better than Van Gogh.
Right?
He also
Funny.
not
It's a great
a horror
reference.
guy, but he's spooky to me.
Yeah,
his
right.
whole
Just
story.
his personality. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really nice drink, but I've never had one stare back at me while I drank it before.
How are our ice cubes doing? And
Well, one of my eyes is free. You know,
Is
like
it?
I said, it's very Lovecraftian. You know, HP used to write his stories based on nightmares he had. And it's funny
Okay.
that all his nightmares had to do with creepy things coming out of ice.
Really? Ah,
A lot of
which is a sort of foreshadowing the story we've been collaborating on.
foreshadowing what's going to come out of Antarctica if, things keep heating up down there.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
Some of us are looking forward to it.
Right. Yeah. There's going to be some discovery for sure.
That and the investigation to see if the Loch Ness Monster's real.
Yeah.
And for the 30th anniversary or something coming up.
Sure. Yeah. That has definitely got plenty of airtime over the years, but
We'll have
yeah.
to do a
So
story in honor of that soon.
what do you think for the cocktail name here?
I like it. Got to be careful I don't drink this too fast, or this interview is gonna.
It's a dangerous cocktail because it's sweet. You don't really there's not really that hit of alcohol. It's a sweeter cocktail. So
Yeah, and if you're like me, like I was a big Halloween kid, I'd make my mom drive us around, and we'd get 7 pillowcases full of candy. You know, we couldn't eat all that, but it was like diabetes central. So of course, when I switched into
So you've got a
adult
sweet tooth.
cocktails, I started off with like Boone's Farm and things, and then
Right, yeah.
navigated to like Malibu and stuff. And like I said, it's not a very manly drink anymore as an adult.
It's not, no, but that's okay. I'm a foo-foo drink kind of guy myself, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah, my fans would be surprised to find out I do enjoy having the little umbrella in it, and they're like, "Well, that's not spooky at all."
Well, they'll hopefully appreciate this then. It definitely tries on the visual side of things, but it's sweet for sure. So anyway, we both threw a name out. Did you have either one of those or maybe something different
For what specifically?
for the name of the cocktail? You said what? Bloodbath?
Bloodbath. Yeah, Bloody Mule is a little on the nose. Might need a second here to think of something more creative.
Yeah, well, we can come back to it. We don't have to nail it down. I just don't like to forget.
Wish I could come up with something that was a little bit more tied into some of the authors. Like you could call it the Telltale Tonic or something, but it doesn't have any tonic water in it, so
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
no, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Got to pay homage to the classic writers out there.
So I just had another corny idea, something with the ears, the eerie.
That's perfect, actually. I wrote
the
for
eerie something.
that. The Eerie Mule.
The eerie mule.
There you go.
Yeah, you like it?
Yeah. Got to make sure you spell it right with a hyphen in there.
Yeah. Eerie mule.
Yeah, I like it. It's perfect. Nobody else will come up with that one.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll pencil that in, and we can kind of pivot over now to really where I like to start the next segment, and we've been bouncing around, and that always happens, but is a bit of a origin story. So when you and I first met, so I'm going to tell this story. We actually met because I do a haunted trail for Halloween every year. And so we live on a private road, and you don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters down here. And my rationale is always, if you come trick-or-treating down my street, I'm going to make it worth your time. And so we, the kids and I have been doing this haunted trail for, probably 8 years. And your son and my son, my youngest son, go to school together. They're same grade, same class, and have become great friends. And but last year I think your son told you about, hey, my buddy August has this, his dad's got this haunted trail, and you got to come and check it out. And you showed up to the haunted trail in costume, and kind of went through it and everything. And that's how you and I met. And so I didn't know really anything about you or what you did for a living or any of those kinds of things. And obviously I've learned about those things since. And so always on my mind to ask, and I've never asked yet, it's really, how do you get started? And really this has become quite an enterprise for you, but how did you get started with, this horror radio theater podcast, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, I think was your first project. So talk to me about the origin story.
Well, you can go back as far as you want. I mean, ultimately, it started with the love of the written word because we adapt fiction, horror fiction into audio. It started with a Scholastic Book Fair when I was 6. I got my first copy of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which were rewritten from folklore by Alvin Schwartz. And they were the quirky, short little things you could tell in less than 3 minutes, often with a jump scare where you leap out at the people around the fire. And I was just as interested as that as I was in the notes at the back of the book that explained where they came from. So, as I got older, I looked into that more. But I was a kid carrying around the tape recorder at weddings, interviewing my drunk uncles and asking them for their ghost stories. And I would transcribe them later. So you can imagine, a kid at like 8, 9 years old typing up the words of his inebriated relatives, and keeping those papers for 20 years. I put them in a box and never lost them. When I got a little older, I got more serious about making a book. That was the original goal. I actually have the book done, but it's never been illustrated, and I've never released it. It's funny how that works out sometimes. I actually found out in the course of making the audiobook version of it that I wasn't actually the best choice to voice my own book because there were a lot of other people that did this for a living. That was my first foray into voice acting. It's not as if I'd not been exposed to acting or radio theater at that point. I enjoyed a lot of the really old shows like Suspense and Lights Out and things, which you can find on YouTube now. But this was different. I was looking for somebody to bring my work to life, so it was very personal. And I met Jonathan Jones, who was he's an African-American voice actor. I have no idea where he lives now, but at the time he was in the Southwest. And he was the first person I met that I tapped to voice one of the stories. And I'll tell you, it was formative having someone bring a story you wrote to life. And actually go the extra mile, not just voicing it, but bringing the characters to life with different voices, adding the sound effects. Jonathan did it all. So I think that was a pretty big deal that the first person I worked with was really more than an actor. He was also a sound designer, not a musician per se, but he knew his way around a DAW, a digital audio workstation with multi-tracking. And from there, back in the day when you used to be able to search on YouTube and actually find what you were looking for with a search, and they had, sorting options, you could find voice actors that had just put their demos out 15 minutes ago. And some of those people are still with me to this day,
awesome.
like some of the first ones from 2012. So that's kind of how it turned into, an audio medium. And then, in order to promote the book, I figure I'm going to have to put out samples. Started a YouTube channel. It was just as a hobby. I had no idea what it was going to become at that point, but one thing led to another. And, I didn't want to give out my own material for free. I only had 30 stories worth of content, so I had to figure a different way to get promo. So I started licensing other people's material to kind of fill in the gaps. And it became sort of an aggregator of content where we had spooky tales, but they weren't all written by me. And I don't know at what point the light bulb really went off. It wasn't then yet. At the same time, my twin brother, who runs a business in Green Bay, was doing a body transformation fitness channel. He was making $25 a day on YouTube, which to me, that sounded like big bucks back then.
Sure it is, yeah. You can make money on YouTube?
Yeah, by just having a six-pack. Well, in some people, funny enough, people think the audience that enjoys horror are probably really spooky guys with a lot of attitude problems, disturbing behavior, but the fitness community is actually way more competitive and scary than most of our fans are. Ours tend to be pretty respectful.
Yeah, I believe that.
It's just a lot of infighting and things going on. Everybody trying to look their best. In our industry, we don't really have competition so much. Everybody collaborates with each other, and everybody's pretty civil. There's enough room for everyone. The people that like what we do can't seem to get enough. So when I came in, the market was already pretty congested. I had no idea about it, but there were a number of YouTube channels doing the same thing that I ended up doing. But my approach was always different, and it's because it started with an ulterior idea. I didn't begin this with the purpose of being an on-screen personality and building a brand around me. It was a book. I wanted the stories to be the star.
Yeah.
And so I did everything I could to basically take the attention off of me, which included not doing my own stories anymore. Before you knew it, we were licensing other people's material, and that became entirely what it was. By 2016, I was doing it full time because it became obvious it was taking a lot of my time, and there was more potential here than there was in a day job working at a call center or whatever else I was doing at the time. And so I had to make a transition. I've not worked another job full-time since then. it just took off because but I worked hard. It was like 75-hour a week raising a kid at home too, with family life and everything, still taking the kids to the park and stuff. And then I had a second child and a third, and it just kept getting bigger. But the latter two, including my son who's friends with yours, he has never seen me go into an office before other than my own. So he had a very different experience. But that's how the thing got started. The actual podcast part started in 2016 when YouTube kind of pulled the rug out from people with kind of a knee-jerk reaction. They had found out there were some terrorism-related videos that snuck onto YouTube and actually had ads being displayed on them, and the Wall Street Journal did a whole expose on it. And so they kind of girded their loins and pulled everything back, and about 90% of our revenue disappeared overnight.
Wow.
It was like they flipped the switch. So it necessitated change. And I learned early on that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. The podcast market has actually been really great for us. Fans there are looking for this type of material. They have longer attention spans, and they love what we do, and they tune in every week, and the content's delivered right to their phones without them having to take extra steps. So that's kind of how we got to the modern version of what we're doing, where we have a lot of podcast shows, and the YouTube channel's still there, but it's not the focal point that it used to be.
Sure.
Although it is becoming a bigger part of what we do now. We do have some new ideas we'll be trying out this year. A lot of fun things that we can do, and trying to get a little bit more into video.
Sure.
TikTok and shorts and vertical video have really taken over. There's pressure on us to try to parlay into that, but as a channel that specializes in long form entertainment, that's a little tricky.
Yeah. I sort of, when you said that, I sort of imagined a kind of Blair Witch Project style of video. But I want to go back to something that you said when you were kind of giving the full kind of background story, which thanks for that. You said that you started out with a different kind of idea in mind, where you weren't trying to create your personal brand. It was all about the story, making the story the star. And that's actually one of the things that to me was very noteworthy. Again, we met. I'm like, hey, there's this Craig guy. He makes a living on podcasting. And wow, that's really interesting. I want to know more about that, right? But you're nowhere to be found, really, in any of the podcasts. And that really stuck out to me. This idea that the story is the star, I think, was very profound, a minute ago when you kind of shared that sentiment. And so anyway, I'm just kind of reflecting on that a little bit, but that, to me, that's it's very obvious when you start to consume the content that you've created, that it's not about Craig. It's not about any one actor. It's not about any one author. It's, I think you an aggregator was a way you put it, but at the same time, you guys are producing all your own content. So in any case, I'm just kind of sharing some reflections there, but maybe I want to go back to the icebreaker questions, which is kind of a sort of funny idea, because typically you do icebreakers at the beginning, but these are really just kind of random questions to throw in as part of the fun. And so grab one out.
That's a lot of questions in there.
There are. We probably won't get to them all.
You should have thrown some spaghetti and peeled grapes. This could have been just like that Halloween game people used to play. That's what the drink reminds me of, too.
Yeah.
They used to turn off the lights and hand the stuff around.
Yeah, right. Ew, what is that?
Oh, man. This one's flipping the script on you here.
Oh, what is it?
Ask the host a question.
You grabbed that one first. You got to be kidding me. There's only one of those in there.
Well, I'm sure we got all kinds of fun ones. Well, and this one is the other one I grabbed is actually a good fodder for a question. I mean, I could ask you a question, but this one requires us to ask a question too. What is your favorite horror movie?
Yeah, so that question's for you, but I'm happy to answer.
Well, I got a question for you. It kind of plays in the same thing. They're probably related. Like, what are you most afraid of?
What am I most afraid of?
Because your audience may not know this yet, and we're going to try to put this together. Hopefully, by the time the episode comes out, you will have been featured on our channel. And we'll promote you so my fans can check out what you do. And I had a lot of fun with collaborations like that. One hand, washes the other, back scratching each other kind of a thing. Because everybody's got something to promote. And I can tell when somebody's having fun with what they're doing. And I get a kick out of helping write custom stories. So you had actually provided a prompt, of something you thought was spooky. And it tells me a little bit about what not necessarily you find scary, but what you find intriguing, maybe think other people would find scary. It was fascinating to me that you included an extraterrestrial angle in your prompt. You know, but you clearly linked it back to your surroundings, which is kind of how I write. I look at what's going on in the world around me, and I can see horror in anything.
Right.
A cardboard box sitting abandoned on the side of a road, even a cat. I just wrote a scary story about an evil cat. I have 2 cats.
And one of them's evil?
No, actually, but it's not hard to imagine.
Right, yeah.
As far as like my favorite movie, then mine reflect what I'm actually kind of scared of. I mean, deep down inside, there's not a whole lot. I'm pretty desensitized after a decade plus of doing this.
Yeah.
I'd be the first guy killed in a horror movie, probably. He'd be like, he's right behind me, isn't he, Clark? I'd be like, all right, the house is really creepily empty. Let's go take a shower now. That's
right, yeah.
I just don't care. But my favorite movie, people would be surprised to know I don't really have favorites. I like genres of things a lot. Same thing with cuisine and drinks. Like I like the whole concept of the meal. It doesn't matter what flavor you put in it. I just like that genre. But with movies, I do like the ones that have kind of open endings that sort of have a folklore appeal. When you look at it, it's curious because it's the same type of stuff that got me into writing. I don't like overly elaborate stories that try to wrap every detail up. I remember my most hated movie was actually The Boogeyman. It had the male star from like Seventh Heaven, if anybody remembers that show. And it started off with a bang, and it should have ended after the first 5 minutes. It would have been a great short film. But they kept going. And it was this CGI-laden trap of disaster that just tried to take like a mythical creature that everyone grows up being afraid of, the boogeyman, and just tried to explain the heck out of it. And there's mystery involved in these things, and that's what makes it spooky. People fill in the gaps. One of my coworkers from Land's End, where I used to work back in the day, actually criticized me for leaving endings open in my stories, because she said the kids that will read my stories will think of much worse things than I could have even come up with. And I said, that's the point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's how the human mind works. If we don't know what happened, we'll make it up, and it's usually worse than what actually happened. Anyway,
so I actually have 2 favorite movies, Jeepers Creepers and Drag Me to Hell, and it's for those reasons that they're kind of rooted in folklore. One's literally about making a gypsy angry.
Okay.
You know, with all this folklore they've got linked to their customs and rituals. They were always kind of outcasts, sort of going around. They, never really settling down in one place. And then the other one is about a creature that returns every 30 years to feast on people. And, I'm not going to spoil the endings for people that haven't seen it, but the whole story just revolves around a very simple idea. The fear is very real. There's a thrill of the unknown. And I guess everything I like kind of ties back into that and reflects in my writing, too, when I do a new story. So I hope everyone will like the story that you helped come up with, because I'm writing that one for you personally.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Since you brought it up, and you've been alluding to it, but you talked about kind of, what scares me, or maybe you said it a different way a little later, what intrigues me. So I generally don't have a lot of fears or frights, or, I don't lie awake at night worrying about, things, but this idea of finding a dead body, like that experience, I feel has to be a profound one to anybody that it's happened to. And it's never happened to me, but I sort of always imagine that experience and the effect that it must have on that person, because that's not an experience you'll ever forget. It's like instantly a core memory. And, there's got to be a lot of psychological impact that comes with that. And so the suggestion that I had made as part of the kind of inspiration for this story that we're collaborating on is this idea that there's a dead body floating under the ice, and it's clear ice, and that you can see it. And I think that does reflect this sort of subconscious fascination I have with this idea that I've never actually personally experienced.
I think it was fascinating, too, that you chose to have it unreachable.
Yeah, sure.
Different than finding him on the road. I actually did have a funny moment where I was on a bike ride with a friend of mine. I do long-distance biking, and we found somebody that I thought was a goner on the side of a trail.
Oh, no.
It turns out he had just been abusing some substances. But, I mean, we were ready to poke the guy with a stick. And so I got to find out how I would react when I found a body.
Yeah.
It always occurred to me this guy was potentially still alive, but it didn't hit me with the gravity you would expect something to. I think because of what I do for a living, I've
Maybe, yeah.
seen everything. I'm using quote fingers for those who are only
Sure.
listening.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of scenarios, where the process of writing calls for you to come up with things that would horrify people. I personally write about a lot of stuff that does actually frighten me. Like I love my kids, I love my pets, so sometimes my stories will touch on those things, and I don't write about violence to children or pets because I want those things to happen. It's because they actually unsettle me.
Sure.
But sometimes you have to put yourself in other people's shoes as well. So with yours, it has an extraterrestrial type angle because, we always wonder what if. And it actually is reminiscent of another story called Water Puppet we featured. One of the very first ones I ever produced where we actually did the sound effects. And a good friend of mine that I never met in person actually wrote it, and she later passed away. So we did a whole memorial around the story and everything, had it reproduced. It's just funny how a lot of people have the same fears.
Yeah. And I imagine in your work, you see those threads often in the different pieces, and maybe going back to, I don't know if it was your brother that asked you the question of, do you think you'll ever run out of stories? There's certainly the danger of repeating yourself. I would think
There's that phrase that says there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Or in our case, in the dark of your closet, whatever. The elements of fear that are present in most horror stories are very archetypical. You can even when I said I reviewed folklore stories as a child, there's entire guides of genres and every convention already by the 1700s. Ghost stories had been whittled down to specific tropes, and those have remained. You're going to see a lot of the same themes. It just varies up from one tale to the next, but there's endless variations of characters, circumstances, and I think that's the same thing that adds variety and spice of life to everyday life. If you vary it up and you make sure you're experiencing a lot of different things, talking to a lot of different people, getting different perspectives, it'll remain entertaining. So that's another thing I think that sets us apart from other channels that sort of chase whatever's popular that week. We'd vary it up a lot, so you don't necessarily know what you're going to get from one episode to the next. Maybe it's going to be a very realistic stalker story. The next story could be something about vampires. I think our fans, the ones who keep coming back, do really enjoy that it's kind of like a smorgasbord. You don't quite know what you're going to see next. At the same time, like I said, pros and cons, we do lose a little bit of the edge that you might have if you were just consistent every single week, same face, same voice, same vampire stories. Whoever tried Twilight, can't say I even know their name, but they hedged everything on that twinkly vampire story, and they did very well for themselves. But
they did, yeah.
That's not going to be my legacy.
Yeah, well, it that kind of thing sort of runs its course, and then everybody moves on.
And that's kind of what I'm afraid of too. But I think it also informed why I did things the way I do. I mentioned I have a brother that runs a company. He's very standalone with everything. He can be the center of attention. The head of the company. He used to do hip hop music and somehow convinced a bunch of other guys to run around on stage wearing his shirts. Even though they were marginally probably better at the actual rapping part, he was charismatic and just drew people into him like a moth to a flame. But I took the opposite approach. I saw longevity as a goal. If you're going to want to start a company that can survive so your children can inherit it or that'll last beyond you, like a pet, tortoise, you're going to want to not rely on a single person. So everything I do is centered around the idea of being able to survive the people that are involved with it. That means whether I'm gone next week, it goes on. That means whether every single one of my hosts have something horrible happen to them and they're gone, it continues. And that is the nature of storytelling. It's been going on for thousands of years. It's the story is the star. It has nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
Except without us, it wouldn't have come to life. We are something special because we are such a hodgepodge from every walk of life, over 20 countries, all different political persuasions. And it doesn't matter because we come together in this melting pot and we make spooky stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, so there's some wisdom in this idea, though, that you should create an organization that doesn't rely on any one individual or small group of individuals, and that it can, in some ways be self-sustaining. I think there's wisdom in that, as a business owner, and as an entrepreneur. And so,
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I think it may be like a Chinese proverb or something, but you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. You teach him how to fish, and he eats for life.
yeah,
I always saw my role as more creating leaders, and that's been a goal. I have an assistant, Natalie, love her to death. She's been with me almost 4 years now. She was a writer. We had licensed something like 60 of her stories, and then I was looking for an assistant to help with some day-to-day type things. Some of the rigmarole I wasn't a fan of, and she came in and was one of the applicants, and the rest is history. She helps out a lot with creative now, pretty much goes where she's needed, and she's been my right-hand person. I wouldn't have it any other way at this point. I could never go back to the way it was after doing it by myself for close to 10 years. Uh, the collaborative nature of this is very strong. I've referred to it to some people as whack-a-mole. They can't get all of us. You only have one hammer. There's like 20 heads popping up.
right, yeah,
You're going to get exhausted trying to end this. And I think that's the edge we have over competitors. I don't like to call them that. I think there's enough room for everybody in this market. But,
sure, yeah,
they are very much focused on a single personality. And that makes what we do very different, both because we can pull off the radio theater, but also because of the longevity angle. I don't know how long these guys have it in them. Will they continue to do this when they're 60, 70 years old? I don't even know if I will.
right, yeah.
Who
So
knows?
you said something earlier about handing off the business to your children. This idea that you could create something like that has a legacy, but I specifically wanted to kind of poke around at is that a desire of yours someday to have your kids involved in this business?
I intend to be involved as long as I possibly can. This is not a labor-intensive job, like construction is. I would imagine I can do this well into my 70s and 80s if I maintain my health, and I'm doing everything I can to do that. But if my children want to get involved, there's always going to be a job for them, whether it's part-time, full-time, or if they want to take over someday.
Sure.
They might have to, rip it from my unfeeling dead hands.
There'll be a horror story about that.
I'll write it in advance. It'll make me look prophetic.
There you
Anyways,
go.
only one has expressed interest, and I think it's because as the children get older and start seeing inflation, they start understanding the value of money a little bit more, and they want to get a head start.
Uh-huh.
I'm very excited that this is what I do, though, versus running a bar. No offense to people who run bars, but that's not the type of thing I would want my children to get involved with.
Sure.
I try to teach them the value of charity, of giving back, and to have something like this where we can both treat it like a business and art at the same time, though, it's really special because we do have that balance, and I think there's parallels to life also with that, where you just have to find a nice mix of things where it's comfortable and you don't put too many eggs in one basket and just rely too heavily on a relationship or whatever it might be. And I think there's a lot of life lessons in this too. My kids maybe don't see me go into an office, a traditional office every day, but they do see the fruits of it a lot quicker.
And they probably see in a more tangible way the work ethic, I would think.
They do, and they're going to see a lot more of it as I get more back into writing. That's actually something it's been kind of a New Year's resolution of mine to actually write more of the stories. It's been years since I wrote with any frequency, which is odd considering where I started. But, as I've come to appreciate the camaraderie and the collaboration between people, I just didn't see the need to do that as much anymore. But it's a part of this I've missed. I think there's a lot of pressure on people in a role like mine to perform every single time. And I don't know, at some point I just sort of got over that. I'm not really concerned about the comments anymore.
Yeah.
My last story I wrote was featured within the last 6 months, and it was called The Ketchup Massacre. It was a tongue-in-cheek kind of dark horror comedy about a ketchup ritual where mustard was the antidote.
I love that.
But in typical horror protagonist fashion, our stupid main character just insists that can't be it. That's too stupid. And he ignores it.
And dies.
He wishes he was dead. There's fates worse than death. I mentioned how I like open endings. You'll
Right,
see.
yeah.
You'll see if you listen to that one. But
okay.
I think I referred to one of the discovery of the bodies as looking like Heinz-sponsored pinatas. You can't have that fun working in an office. And
Well,
I knew I was going to get comments on that line. I
yeah.
may have checked the section just to see that.
Just to see. Yeah, that's funny.
But, yeah, go ahead. I'm not concerned about the quality anymore, though. With the tools available to people nowadays, there's no excuse to not write a good story with the internet and all the resources we have.
Sure, yeah. Well, so you kind of cued in on one of my sort of guilty pleasures, and that's finding campy horror flicks. The sort of B film. It's more entertaining or funny than it is really like scary. And so one of my past guests is a creator of such films, as well as some is very genuine and very very artistic films as well that would generally have some scare to them. But his first film and kind of a claim to fame because it really took off was Ed Gein the musical.
Oh boy.
And so that just kind of gives you an idea of the type of campiness. So one of my other favorites is Lamageddon. And so they're just and they don't pretend to be scary, right? They know that they're like probably poorly produced and the plot is not all that plausible, but the idea is to have fun with it and be entertaining. And so anyway, one of my guilty pleasures.
I disagree that llamas can't cause you Armageddon. So, if you ever met them.
Yeah, right.
They just look fuzzy. But I think that's right up my alley. I'm surprised I haven't heard of some of these. Although I did have a funny story where the producer, director, writer of Sharknado actually followed all of our stuff on every social media.
That's awesome.
And that's not how we expected to be made, as it were, but I would accept that. I don't really fanboy over things. I've had run-ins with celebrities over the years doing this.
Yeah.
But for some reason, the fact that he went all out and went on the Twitter, the Facebook, the Instagram, the YouTube channel, everything, we saw him pop up. I somehow in my head built it up like it's the guy himself, not his PR team or something. I don't know what they were doing. But I messaged him back, and I was more upset that he didn't get back to me than I thought I was. And I'd never even seen the movies.
Yeah.
But I sort of responded by saying, well, that's fine. I'm going to write an even worse movie than Sharknado then. And so I did. I'm not going to give it away because you'll see it later. But it started my own series of wacky Armageddon stories.
I'm looking forward to it. Well, if you need contacts in the movie biz in this area, let me know. I've got plenty for you. But you said something there. Shoot, what was it? Oh yeah. So you were kind of talking about some of the famous people that you've come across, and I happen to know that one of the voiceover actors that you've used is Daniel Radcliffe. So that's one I know about, but I'm curious, are there others, and how do they kind of come to you as as these sort of famous people outside of this genre, but they're picking up work as voiceover actors.
Well, it's interesting because they all come from different places. Radcliffe was different. I mean, this was post peak Harry Potter. It was when he was working on other projects, and he did I think it was called The Lady in Black or something similar to that, and it was a horror film. He was very much trying to distance himself from these cutesy Disney type narratives and things. He wanted to be taken seriously. We actually didn't contact Radcliffe directly. It was his agent that actually spoke with us, and he had recorded a bonus feature for a DVD of that horror movie where the winner of a competition actually had their story read aloud by him. I mean, it was him just coming into a studio and just recording it, but it fell into obscurity. This person had their thing done, and then nobody ever heard it. Well, we asked if we could produce it our way with sound effects and music, and we, took this audio, which is basically recorded with a lavalier mic in the middle of a sound stage, and we gussied it up. So that wasn't quite the bar we set for working with celebrities, but it was the first interaction I'd had with an agent for a big name star.
Sure.
Since then, I've spoken with Robert Englund on the phone, who played Freddy Krueger. And we didn't want to hire him to play Freddy. You can't, of course. Everything's tied up with New Line Cinema and all that. Wanted him to play a scientist. And he had remarked that the script we sent was better than 90% of the garbage his agent sends him, while his agent's sitting right next to him.
I love that.
You could tell they're offended. But he simply asked for too much money. A lot of these guys are tied up in their prestige still. I think I'm not going to throw him under the bus with the amount, but it was well beyond what the highest paid voice actors get. A lot of guys that work with SAG-AFTRA, who do the Screen Actors Guild, they'll get $400 for a finished, for a minimum, just for popping into a studio for 10 minutes and recording a handful of lines. And that is actually in our wheelhouse. If I could find a creative way to use people, that would be fun. But we've actually had a number of people record for free, like Tay Zonday, who was famous back in the day, went viral for Chocolate Rain.
Yeah.
That guy has an incredibly deep voice.
Yes, he does.
He's done Edgar Allan Poe voluntarily on his channel, and he was perfect. So we had him do a special, but we didn't bring him in because of Chocolate Rain. I just liked the way his voice sounded.
Right.
And he plugged our channel, and we promoted him, and it's still one of the best jobs anybody's ever done. But he just recorded a normal story by one of my good author friends, Michael Whitehouse. We work with Mark Fishbach, better known as Markiplier, when he only had 2 million subscribers. I think he's up to 28 million or something now. And his outtakes included him getting frustrated and going to the bathroom right in the middle of the lines. He did it. If anyone's interested, it's called The Scarecrow Corpse. It's a really good story. It had nothing, we picked it because it had something to do with the medical field. There's a coroner, and anyone that knows Mark knows he actually went to medical school before he hung it up and became a YouTuber. So he was down in a lab coat. Not the same thing as a mortician, but, it was similar enough that he could vibe with the character. Sure. And he had a good time with it, but a lot of times these guys will have you do all their editing. They're not professional voice actors by trade. Like Tay is more of a musician. A lot of them do on-camera stuff. I've worked with Patrick Rothfuss, who's a best-selling fantasy novel author who happens to live in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, where I've come from. And he's just a huge horror fan too, loves the stuff, loves the classics, and he narrated a classic. Came over in his sweatpants and recorded it in my producer's basement. That was kind of surreal. He went to college with me, but now he's a big celebrity, I guess, walking around looking like a sophisticated Gimli from Lord of the Rings. Just a lot of really fun moments, but we don't seek those type of things out. It's kind of crazy that we've never really had any success with those things. It wasn't like when Mark plugged us that we got, 500,000 subscribers. It was very difficult for us to get traction that way. We've never had luck jumping on bandwagons with like Five Nights at Freddy's when it got bigger, animatronics, and mascot horror is big in video games now. We don't jump on it. Maybe we lose a little bit, but I feel like we retain a little bit of that artistic integrity. Yeah,
so I was going to just stop you there and comment on that a little bit. I think going back to this idea that the story is the celebrity, and so my hunch is that you have a very loyal following who is into it for the story. And they value, my guess is they'll value high production, but they could care less who's actually doing the narrating.
It's possible. You could look at it that way. Of course, I'm not going to ask them that question directly because that would hurt my voice actor's feelings.
Yeah, probably.
But we do have, I do get the sense that, again, as I said, my philosophy is again, we're whack-a-mole here. My goal is to diversify. And I think everybody on our team has to have, at least on a gut level, the feeling that, we are a team, but we need to do what it takes to keep this thing moving. We have a longtime host, Otis Gyrie. I've referred to him as my white Morgan Freeman, or maybe Morgan is the black Otis Gyrie. I don't know who came first. I know they're around the same age. But Gyrie's been with us for 14 years. And he would be the closest to what you could say is irreplaceable. And nobody is ever going to really fill his shoes. But at the same time, as this project goes on, the fact that we're mortal becomes more and more apparent. If you wake up in the morning, Mike, and you got a kink in your back, or you sprain a kidney by trying to grab a Kleenex out of a box, you felt that. Well, you have to prepare for a future in which everything can be changed.
I know what you're saying, but I gotta say there's a number of rock groups out there that might be immortal.
Yeah, some of these guys,
like
makes you
Rolling
wonder.
Stones, or
considering what those guys ate and drink,
right?
It seems unfair.
I got distracted by that comment, but let's grab another question out of the icebreaker bucket here and have a little fun with that.
Sure, we'll just follow up there with that last thing I said. I love Otis, but his season 16, if you can believe it, debuts September 29th, and he's going to have a co-host for the first time ever.
Oh wow! All right.
After 16 seasons.
So he's training his understudy. That's what I heard.
Some of them don't go quietly into the transition because there's a lot of pride in being cherry-picked to have a show worked around you. But I think he understands this is a business thing. We have to make sure that the show continues.
Right.
This new question says, do you have any personal experiences of the unexplained? Ghosts, aliens, UFOs? If you want me to answer that, we could do an entire show just on that.
So more than one experience then.
I mentioned, I don't remember if we got this on camera or not earlier, but I mentioned that I got a ghost martini from a haunted bar in Baraboo just recently too, where they had a little marshmallow ghost. And I've been to that place a couple of times on their ghost tour. And one of the first things they ask is if anyone that's in there is sensitive. Some people just have like more of a sixth sense for this kind of thing. They pick up on stuff other people don't. It's not like I walk past a cemetery and see people playing poker and they're around their gravestones, but I am more open-minded, I think, than some people are to this because I had a love for it. There's just something about it that didn't scare me. It intrigued me. We talked about the difference between those things. As far as personal experience goes, I think you're more likely to have those if you're open-minded. It's sort of like keeping your ear to the ground for it. Would you even notice a ghost flitting by in your peripheral vision or something if you didn't believe in it? You're going to dismiss everything as a cold draft. I've lived in multiple houses I swear were haunted. I've whipped out the sage before to try to clear the air, mostly because the kids didn't care for it. Also, sage smells really good, so there's nothing wrong with that. But when a kid started seeing stuff, it makes you wonder. You hear that stuff sometimes passed down in families, and you can make of it what you will. Like, oh, how stereotypical is that? Guy who made a scary stories channel can see ghosts. It's more like they see me. I would prefer not to see them. That's I'm also a Christian, so some of my beliefs don't necessarily mesh with what I do for a living.
Sure.
They'll in fact tell you this stuff is demonic in some cases. You shouldn't consult with mediums and things. And we talk about a lot of that in our stories.
Sure.
Is this entertainment? Am I doing wrong? A lot of people don't know this, but I actually had a conversation with God the day I monetized the channel, flipped the switch to make it into a business from a hobby, because I wasn't sure if what I was doing was on the up and up.
Right.
There was actually guilt associated with making a living.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, so a couple of things I wanted to kind of maybe call out on what you shared. And one is that this idea that if you're open to it, you're more aware and more accepting. And so that when you have those experiences, you're like, yeah, that's what that was. And then I want to talk a little bit about the kind of Christian kind of thing there and the conflict and just maybe share a few thoughts that might be helpful. But there's no sin, let's say, in entertaining people, I don't think, in a holistic way. Like horror itself it has some elements to it that could be counter, but I think at the same time everybody understands this is a fantasy, right? This is not, you're not, trying to promote certain satanic type of beliefs or anything like that. These are stories. So that's just kind of a reaction to something you said there. And just trying to think, there was more I wanted to say about that in terms of being Christian, that conversation with God, the idea that you're maybe that there's a conflict there.
Well, this might even tie into this question you asked. I consider that paranormal. I mean, we don't see God come to us in the form of a burning bush anymore these days. But like I said, there's value in quieting down and listening. And for me, like asking for a call in the direction of spooky stories, that just seemed like the wrong thing to pray for. But I didn't want to do something that was going to rile up my creator that I believed in. I was like, basically, if this is going to offend you and you want me to do anything else, I'll do it. But if this is what you're somehow going to work through this, give me some kind of a sign. And, I'm not going to go into crazy detail, but I got a sign not once but twice. And then I flipped the switch, and the rest is history. It's fed dozens of people. I mean, I've had writers that had Christmas and were able to buy gifts for their children after losing their jobs because we were able to swing that and license 8 to 20 of their stories, to give them like $500-600 overnight, to let people's ideas come to life. I mean, that same feeling I got when mine was narrated for the first time, we create that. We provide that to people first time all the time. It's really neat. And those are my favorite parts of this. It's not the earning the money. That's secondary. I think if you do what you love and people can feel it, they'll support you. That's why we do have that, that core audience.
Yeah.
But I think it all goes back to that experience I had where I literally said, is this what you want me to do? Because I have 100 other things I could do. And this is what I chose. Right. And it's been like that ever since. But I have had experiences with other entities and things just because I think it sort of attracts it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, so everything you just kind of, like, as you were talking, reminded me of the thing I was struggling to remember, and that is this idea that, Christian beliefs would warn you, I think, that to the extent that they're spirits, there are also evil spirits, and that there is, potentially a dangerous element to the reality of the spirit world.
Yep. And I still won't allow a Ouija board in my house.
Right. Yeah. And so
other things maybe, but not a Ouija board.
Yeah. And I think that's the concern there. It's not that, that the entire subject matter is somehow evil. It's just that you need to be careful about the reality of the spirit world, because there are evil spirits. And I think that's the thing. That's my takeaway when I think about my own Christian beliefs and, what they're trying to warn us of. So anyway, just to help, it's again, not that the fiction genre is itself inherently evil, but the reality of the spirit world, can be dangerous, and so just be aware.
Well, it's possible you could even look at the writing of fiction as a sin. If you think lying is bad. I mean, Ryan George is one of my favorite YouTubers. He does skits where he plays all the characters, and I would like to have him on as a guest someday because I think he's a great voice actor, a good actor, period. But he did, a video called The First Guy to Write Fiction. And he dumbed it down to it's just lying to people. You're recounting something as if it happened, yes. And you know darn well it didn't happen.
Right, right, yeah.
I'll put it this way. I'll be very upset if I get to the afterlife and find out that I'm doomed because I wrote fiction, because I lied to everyone.
I think you're okay. I think people understand it's entertainment, right?
We'll see. But it's fascinating seeing good work through people in such a bizarre medium, because I think everybody gets the idea that you have to work in a church, or something to be able to serve, or you have to volunteer at a soup kitchen or something. And like I said, I kept testimonials. I mean, we've made a difference in the lives of people you would never imagine this would do.
Yeah.
Some people just really enjoy this. And fascinatingly enough, there's science that proves that the same part of your brain that lights up when you're scared of like a scary story in the safety of your home or something is the same part that lights up when you find something funny.
Yeah,
that's why dark horror comedy like Chucky or something works well.
Sure.
There's people that just really dig that genre. And that's why Ketchup Massacre is my favorite story I've ever written. Yeah. Because it lights up the same part of your brain, and even in, scripture, it talks about heaven. Everybody's got this idea, but they all say there won't be any pain. You're going to be laughing. I'm like, well, to me, there's no difference. Yeah. You want to run up and jump scare me and then 2 seconds later, I'm still alive?
Right, yeah.
It's the same part of my brain lighting up, so...
So Craig's Heaven is like a series of jump scares.
Yeah, but I would admit that would get old.
Yeah, after a while.
I'm not a fan of those mascot horror games for that. I don't know how the kids manage to watch that ad nauseum, It's just the creativity present in some of these things is just not where I wish it would be.
Well, so some of that is just money grab, like when I see it. So,
well, and like I said, art versus, commercialism.
Yep.
Some people move a little more in one direction than I would be comfortable with, and that's fine.
Yeah. So,
by the way, all my eyeballs have now melted, and they're just sitting in the bottom of the glass now. So.
Oh yeah, look at that. Well, that's a little incentive to kind of finish it all off, really kind of clean out the rest and chew on a few remaining ice cubes and enjoy the gummies. So let's grab another question out of the icebreaker bucket.
Sure, we'll see what this one says. Where did the name Creepypasta come from?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be a story behind that.
Well, first of all, I will point out you have misspelled it as 2 words, sir. This will offend the fan base.
Uh-oh. All right. So
I know what it sounds like. It sounds like spooky noodles, but that's got nothing to do with it, actually. And the actual explanation of it, I do know, but it was not something I had personal experience with, even though I was literally there when we transitioned from angry modem sounds to high speed. I don't remember this. There was a phrase called copypasta, where apparently you could go into, any forum on the internet back when people had guest books and stuff, and somebody would be copying and pasting what would now be the equivalent of a completely unrelated meme and hijacking your thread.
Okay.
So creepypasta is supposed to be pronounced creepypasta. It's a copy and paste meme-like, disruptor in your thread but that's decidedly spooky in nature. It would take the form usually of a very short story that you could tell in a paragraph, and then just pop it in there. So people could be discussing like the best garnish to put, on their Thanksgiving dinner. And then all of a sudden somebody posts something about a faceless man that abducts children, and it completely hijacks the thread. Now everybody's talking about that.
Got it.
It was meant to be
So
almost annoying, but what's curious that it became a genre. This word became synonymous with fictional horror, specifically written by amateurs. It got the attention of Hollywood.
Sure.
Sci-Fi actually did a channel where they specifically picked up creepypasta stories, but the lines got blurred like with everything. A lot of people on YouTube still refer to them as creepypastas, but I think that fad is mostly over. Some people think of them in terms of specific characters, like Slender Man was considered a creepypasta character. Jeff the Killer, Laughing Jack, a whole bunch of different things. Mr. Widemouth. These are all stories that came out within like about the same 5-year period when this was blowing up. So it had a very visual means. You got the impression it was something that was popular with 12 to 15-year-olds. Unfortunately for us, our genre, the type of quality we produce doesn't really appeal to that crowd. We hit more like 24 to 36 and up. So we had a really difficult time tapping into that audience, even if we did want to produce those. Some of them were very well written, actually. We weren't willing to go to the depths to get the attention of 12-year-olds. Our content is not appropriate for children. It's got levels of violence on occasion or profanity that are for adults, although we try not to do too much of that.
Sure.
So creepypasta, that's where it came from, but it's always been a very strange concept. And I actually own a website called creepypastastories.com because we wanted to leverage the popularity of that term. It's basically a read-along site where we post the text of the stories. And it's completely free to check out if anybody wants to take a peek at it. It's got thousands of stories on it written by amateur authors, and you can rank them. But I like it. That genre has made us a lot of money, and it's put a lot of food on a lot of people's tables. So I'm glad that there was a word to describe it.
Yeah. Well, so just to kind of tie it all up for folks, I put that in there because I knew about your Creepypasta Stories website, and so that's one of several projects, kind of the way I think about them. So Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, Creepypasta, and then what are the others? So just kind of give us a rundown.
Well, the main channel is Chilling Tales for Dark Night. It's an aggregator. It has every podcast on it. So that's, if somebody's new to it, that's the best place to start. Creepypastastories.com is the other website. There is a website for Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and it's got a subscription area where you can sign up and get ad-free versions of every show. So it's not just the one under that main banner. Our main podcast is the flagship. It's named after the channel, and that comes out twice a week on Mondays and Wednesdays. But we have other shows that were spinoffs. Scary Stories Told in the Dark is narrated by Otis Gyrie, who I mentioned sounds a bit like Morgan Freeman. He's got Sunday episodes. And we have Drew Blood's Dark Tales. He sounds like a dead-on ringer for Sam Elliott, but he's in his 20s. He's really great. And then we had Fear from the Heartland, which has been put on hiatus, but is still available to listen to. And we also produce Horror Hill, which is a long-running show, initially narrated by my good friend Jason Hill, who moved on to other things, and it's now narrated by Eric Peabody, who's one of our best performers. He does music and everything in between. He's like I mentioned Jonathan Jones earlier on my first foray into this. These guys being super talented, wearing multiple hats. And Eric's another one of those guys. So I'm surrounded by a bunch of talented people, and you can check out any of those shows on the main channel. You can also subscribe to them on Spotify. They're all on every place where you can find podcasts. Basically, pick and choose whatever you want to listen to. Every show's got the same kind of thing going on, but they have a different flavor. The hosts add a little bit of diversity to it, and they each have a say in their stories. Eric likes things that are a little more gritty, for example, a little more mature. Whereas Chilling Tales is that full-on radio theater experience that's got multiple actors with sound effects. So there's something for everybody. And if you like a hodgepodge and you like to stay on your toes, then check out the channel because that one's got everything. And we got history going back 12 years, back to when we used to do just one-off stories. And there's compilations of 5-story mixes. So if you're feeling a little bit lazy, you can just pop on one of those and you'll be falling asleep to sound of screams. I don't know why people do that. It's still better than a commercial coming up out of nowhere, I suppose, with the volume 10 times higher. I'm sure you've had that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But we really enjoy what we do, and we're hoping that it's going to go on for years to come here yet. There's certainly no shortage of stories. My brother is still wrong.
And, maybe that's one of the things that keeps it going, just to continue proving him wrong.
Problem is when you have too many ideas. You got to sit down and put pen to paper still, and that's the hard part.
Right. Yeah. You got to pick one and bring that to life. But well, okay. So we've been rolling here for a bit, and I think it's probably time to wrap us up here to keep the episode somewhat reasonable in length. But I'm hoping that folks that tuned into this episode kind of got a little bit of insight into a very specific genre and some of the inspiration, the passion, and the thought work that goes into creating some unique content for a broad audience here. And just one of another example for me about people who are out there making it go, right? Making their passion, their lifestyle, and earning the living while doing it. And that to me has always been inspirational. So thank you, Craig, for being on the show.
You're welcome. And if I could end with one parting thing, something I always tell my kids, because I feel like a lot of ideas die before they get started because of fear. I always tell my boys, don't wait to be perfect, just get started. That's literally how this worked.
Yeah.
If I would have stopped at any point here, it never would have evolved. Every hurdle that I hit ended up being a springboard into something even bigger, whether it was a shower thought or maybe a setback like the YouTube demonetization led to the podcasting. Don't necessarily think that the first time something goes wrong with your business, your show, whatever it is you're doing, your songs aren't turning out quite right, that means you're supposed to hang it up. Sometimes it means you just need to get more creative. And so I'd like to teach the kids that. And I hope that inspires people. The other thing I would say is also we're trying to put together a story where you yourself play a character. We talked about that.
We did, yeah.
At this point, it's not been produced yet, but it's been written. It's called The Body in the Lake. It's going to be featured on the Chilling Tales podcast on October 7th. Whether you're in it or not, Mike, but we hope you are. Mike is to play Carl Donovan. You never know what's going to happen, though. We would be in the world as it is. But if all things go as planned, check that, and maybe we can update the show notes for each other and point people in that direction, because that'll be fun.
Yeah, thanks for kind of bringing that in here as we wrap things up. Appreciate the opportunity there to kind of dip my toes in that as someone who's kind of dabbled in the music and entertainment world most of my life. Voice acting is something I've always wanted to do, but haven't had a ton of opportunity for. So I do have some demo tapes out there, and I've done a little bit, but the things I really want to do is the character acting and some of the sound effects and the things like that if you listen to it, you wouldn't recognize my voice.
Well, you get to play in this one a guy who finds a body under the ice, just like you asked for. So,
yeah,
and you get a couple of buddies in there with you, so you won't be alone. We'll team you up with a couple of really good vets.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Again, dipping my toes in. So thanks for that opportunity, Craig, and looking forward to promoting that and kind of the bit of cross promotion that comes out of that. So,
thanks for having me. At the end of this is all supposed to be fun, and if it's easy to forget that when you make it into a business.
It is.
Caution anybody starting off doing this again too. Even in we're on episode 11 here. I know you said.
Yeah.
I'm on episode 280 on Chilling Tales, and that's not counting all the other shows.
All the other shows, yeah.
I'm well past the point where this is new. So if you can still laugh and smile, I think 10 years into it, that's a sign you're doing the right thing. So pay attention, when you're following your dreams, that you still have that joy.
Yeah.
And especially make sure that when you do decide to make it your job, if you flip that switch like I did, that you still find blessings in it every day, and that you don't just suck the life out of it by taking it too seriously. Because at the end of the day, it's funny any of us make money doing what we love.
Yeah. Yeah. And really that's, again, back to the inspiration for this podcast is talking to people like you, Craig, who are making a living, doing what they love, and still smiling. So great wisdom at the end there from Craig. What was it? Don't wait for perfect, just get started, and keep smiling.
Yep, and don't forget to lift other people up too. Always look for those opportunities. Like I said, my best moments in this were not paying myself, they were paying other people.
Yeah.
You can find joy in that. I guarantee you'll never find a shortage of people that want to work for you.
Isn't that true? Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thanks again. If for those of you that have made it this far, you've made it to the end of this show, I really appreciate you hanging in there and listening to Craig and I catch up and talk about his career in podcasting and in horror fiction. Thanks so much for being here. And that's it. We're done. Episode 11 in the can, 011.
Thanks for having me.
It's been my pleasure. Oh, hey, one more thing. We'd love it if you followed us on social. Ampéritif on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Pinterest. And Ampéritif Podcast on Instagram.